Good morning, everyone. Our discussion panel today is titled, The Greatest Risk Requires the Greatest Competence, Private Practice and Psychotherapy. Now let's begin the panel discussion. I'm so pleased to introduce you to all of our panelists. To my right is Kate Creed-Demarais, an experienced change and strategy consultant in healthcare, a certified professional coactive coach, an educator and partner at the consulting firm The Potential Group. Kate also works with the Citizens Advisory Group, which brings patient and caregiver voices and perspectives to healthcare regulation in Ontario. Next, we have Bianca Stefina, a social service worker, child and youth care practitioner, and certified clinical trauma specialist. She owns a group practice, and in addition to her own psychotherapy practice, she also provides consultations, trainings, and mentorship to fellow therapists, promoting growth and advancing trauma-informed care. Next is Natalie Blake, and she is a social worker with extensive experience in the mental health field. She opened a private practice during the pandemic in response to the sharp rise of mental health issues experienced by many. Natalie is also a professor in the Social Service Worker Diploma program at Humber Polytechnic and is currently pursuing her doctorate of social work. Nikki Healy is a social worker and one of the college's practice associates with the Professional Practice Department. Nikki specialized in case management and psychotherapy services for veterans suffering from PTSD within government and community settings. In addition to her work with the college, she continues to operate a small private practice. You can read all of our panelists' full biographies on the virtual portal. And from wherever you are virtually, I'm sure you're joining me in welcoming our panelists today. Thank you all so much for being here. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Christina.
Pleasure. As we begin this panel discussion, I did want to provide a bit of context as to why we decided to focus on the topic of private practice and psychotherapy. One of the most common inquiries the Professional Practice Department receives is related to registrants' ability to perform the controlled act of psychotherapy. Additionally, over the past several years, the college has heard from many registrants and educators that a growing number of new graduates are planning on going into private practice and psychotherapy right out of school. It's important to note that performing the controlled act of psychotherapy is not an entry to practice competence. The skills, knowledge, and judgment required must be developed with time and experience, and competence is not acquired from academic training alone. In today's session, we're going to start by broadly exploring the competencies registrants need to consider before opening a private practice and performing psychotherapy, as well as what registrants who are already in private practice should keep in mind to ensure they remain competent. I'm thrilled to be facilitating this panel discussion, and now we're going to start delving into these important topics. So we're going to start our question today with the registrants, and then Kate, we're going to go to you afterwards. And so we'll start with Bianca and move our way down to Nikki, if that's okay. So just wondering if we could start our conversation by having you all share about your decision to enter private practice, and how did you know that you were ready?
That's a great question. So I started my private practice. I was in the community mental health for just shy of 5 years. And through those 5 years, I worked in diverse settings. So I worked with children, youth, and adults, and across various domains. That really helped me gain my skill set and its knowledge to apply to a lot of different cases in private practice. The second piece that I did was in 2019, I got associated and affiliated with the Arizona Trauma Institute, and their faculty really mentored me in honing in on my clinical skills and my confidence as a practitioner. So I worked very closely with their faculty, developing some skills. And then my last job before going into private practice was in youth justice, and it was intensive case management. And through there, I got counseling experience, so the one-to-one and group counseling. And then I was also overseen by an MSW to make sure that I was doing things properly. It kind of all fell into my lap, essentially. And I really did a lot of professional development through that job experience, which was really, really nice. And then I started honing in on my clinical skills. What did I want to specialize in, and what would I need to specialize in that? On top of that, I acquired a supervisor that really aligned with my values, my personal values, and my clinical values of how I wanted to show up in the therapy space. And last but not least, I did a lot of self-work. And as much as I'd love to say therapy was enjoyable, it was, we went and I vented. It was the messy, hard, scary work of really honing in on my different parts of self and things that held me back and things that I also didn't want to bring into my future, specifically in clinical practice or just in my future in general. So I think all 4 or 5 of those things combined really spoke to my readiness, and just having somebody that I really looked up to as well kind of guide me along the way was very imperative for me as well. So I guess my well-rounded question or my answer was experience, supervision, consultation, my own self-regulation work, and then obviously dipping into some business practices as well, which we'll get into, and I'll talk about how I really learned the ins and outs of business, but I'll give it over to Natalie, but that's kind of my route.
Thank you. Okay. For me, I have to say that psychotherapy private practice was not on my radar at all. So I was teaching full-time professor, still doing that. And prior to that, 11 years of experience in direct social work. So case management, advocacy, community work, community development, working with people with poverty issues and mental health issues. And so I was actually approached by a colleague with whom I previously worked with. And she had branched into psychotherapy after being in direct social work for some time, frontline work. And so this was right at the start of that infamous pandemic. And so she approached me and she said that she's branched into psychotherapy and there's such a need because of this upside down event that happened to so many of us. And so isolation, grief, and loss. And so where she was working at the time in this mental health clinic, they were looking for experienced social workers, registered social workers who had front line experience and could be able to provide that, meet that need. But also for me, I thought, okay, I'm really intrigued by that possibility, but I also had to realize I need some training as well. What modalities would I lean into? So really self-reflection, being able to lean into myself and say, okay, what areas? And the supervision I received was fantastic. So although before I got into psychotherapy, I had 11 years of experience, I still needed to gain those competencies to be effective, ethical, and to do it right, because we do not want to cause harm to our clients. So that's sort of the experience. It kind of fell into my lap. You kind of said that too, and I'm very grateful for that. So it was quite the journey and a wonderful journey. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I can say for me, I think that actually pretty early in my social work education, I knew that psychotherapy was a field that I wanted to get into and eventually private practice. Coming from, a predominantly white community in Newfoundland, being mixed race myself, I kind of had this really, I guess, unique and intimate understanding of how like race, socioeconomic status, and identity sort of weave together to compose what might be our mental health, our relationship with mental health. And so I knew that I wanted to create a space where clients, all types of clients, including those who look like me, could come and have a place where they could be vulnerable and authentic without others defining who they are. So that's kind of where it came from. And then sort of getting into that, knowing that that was my, goal in terms of career, I was really committed to sort of building that competence. I knew it's such a huge responsibility, right? People come to us when they're very vulnerable. So I wanted to be, committed to making sure I get counseling experience throughout my career, getting a clinical MSW. And then from there, like the others have spoken of, getting those specialized modalities in areas of interest and passion for me, which was trauma and grief and working with people of color. So that was sort of the background. And from there, once I had the foundation, I thought, okay, I'm ready to go into this. However, I had that clinical support throughout my career. And I started actually first as an independent contractor with a clinic that had a great diverse team, similar to what Natalie said, wonderful access to supervision and peer support. And that was so important for me, especially in the early stages of private practice, to make sure that you have a team around you and you're not isolated. So I think that that's a really important part of, getting started in private practice, but also as you go and build your career in the area of psychotherapy.
That's such a good point, Nikki, because it's funny, it's right in the name, but private practice is private and you're isolated, right? And, to have that team around you that you have to develop and create is so important. Thank you. Okay, got a question for you. As someone who brings the perspective from the client voice, what preparation would you expect a registrant to have before entering private practice?
So that's such a great question. And all three of you have just shared the thickness of what you have to bring to it, right? There's a lot of dimensions. So if I think specifically from the client perspective, which is what I hear in the citizen advisory group work I do, they don't care if you're a social worker. They don't care if you're like an RP. They want to know, can they trust you? And you, before you engage in private practice, all the things you guys are outlining are the things that help you create that the safety and the sense of trust, right? That you need to sort of create with the client. And so they care less about your credentials. What they want to know is if I'm coming in from a racialized perspective and I'm coming in, do you understand the context? Like one of the contexts I bring is part of the queer community. I want to know if I come to you and say I feel unsafe as a trans person, are you going to tell me I'm going to help you do some CBT to get over your fear, or I'm going to acknowledge that it is unsafe for you, and how do you navigate that? So it's what preparation do you need to do to understand clients in context, and that what each client specifically needs to be safe with you so that they can be vulnerable. And I think you've all outlined so clearly the things that I see are so important, which is seeing your degree as the first step. It's not anything except a first step. Building a community around you that you can bring both your self-work to, like, oh, this client is unsettling to me. Why is that? Help me understand that. Or a place to sort of say, I want to use AI for notes. Is that okay? Like, what are the ethics of this? How do we work through this? Like any of these things, right? Along the whole spectrum. So community and a plan for ongoing development. Like these are the core things. And Bianca, you said it so beautifully. This thing, your self-work is probably the core, right? It's like, how am I getting triggered by this? Or how am I mentally prepared to charge people money in a way that I see for like myself and my soul, and like how am I set up for that, and how do I work those things out? So it's a bit of a long answer, but to me it's the multiple dimensions that involve all those things, so that from a client perspective they trust that you're going to keep them safe to work through what they need.
It's a great answer. Trust is what it all boils down to. That's how we keep them safe, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you so much. We're going to, again, start with the registrants for our second question. I'm curious to hear about what surprised you most, or what were you least prepared for when you entered private practice? And Nellie, you're already laughing, so I'm going to start with you.
Getting back to that moment, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, and then we'll go Nikki and then Bianca,
Absolutely. Really great question. So as an independent contractor and working full-time as a professor, what I was surprised at, it was a pleasant surprise, like the great level of autonomy. I had the ability with this private practice clinic to be able to choose clients, a caseload, how the volume of caseload, to have that great balance, which I really appreciated. But with that came this sort of mental and emotional mind shift of now it's not so much team-based, I'm very much kind of on my own in terms of that, because I'm working virtually. And so I'm not in the office connecting with the team as much. So there's some element of isolation. So a huge area for me was recognizing the outreach for consultation with my colleagues, my peers, and supervision. Creating that professional community, connecting was so important. This work cannot be done in isolation. And I think that's been a theme we've been sharing, even though you're doing that, for some of us, we're doing it remotely like I am. So at the clinic I'm at, the supervisor is so intentional. Every month we meet as a team, as peers, and as supervision consultation as well. And also what I've decided to do just about 2 years ago, I actually created my own peer consultation group as a form of accountability, as a form of community self-reflection. Am I doing it right? Or I need just to bounce some ideas to other individuals who are in psychotherapy. So those are like the surprises that were pleasant, but then I had to really navigate, okay, not to be intentional, not to do this in isolation, but in community. So very fundamental to this work that we do.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I would just piggyback actually on the autonomy piece, because I think, that's a huge part, of course, of private practice. It's one of the great things, but it's also one of the risks. And I would say for me, especially for starting, it's not just having that autonomy, but realizing that
You can like choose your caseload, and it's actually incumbent upon you as a professional to understand the boundaries of your competence and being able to assert yourself when, for example, if at the intake stage or in an initial session with a client, you discover, okay, the presenting concerns here are actually much different than what I expected, which commonly happens in psychotherapy. And being able to then, at that time, I was working for a clinic, so being able to then take that back to leadership and say, here's what was presented to me. Here's my concerns. I feel this is outside of my area of expertise. Here is what I would recommend. And then also feeling comfortable having that conversation with the client without feeling guilty about it, right? So really knowing that what you're doing and the decisions and recommendations that you're making is grounded in that best interest of the client, despite how uncomfortable it might be to refer people out once they've come to you and been vulnerable already, right? So I think that was like one of the first things that I learned in practicing psychotherapy and being in private practice.
Thank you. I think a lot of registrants or people in private practice know this, but what you charge for an hour is not just the 50 minutes you're sitting with a client. There's a lot of administration work that goes on behind the scenes. There's billing, there's charting, there's direct billing if you offer that. On top of that too, I think one thing that I had that was kind of challenging to navigate coming from a case management position was, what is my responsibility for as an independent practitioner or as an individual therapist versus as a case manager in a community setting? And that's where consultation and supervision is so imperative. When a client leaves the country and they have a mental health crisis, you get an email. What do you do with that, right? And that's where you don't turn to AI, you don't turn to the internet, you turn to your supervisor who has the experience in the field, because that will kick up your imposter syndrome when you're unsure on where to go. And we have such a responsibility to keep vulnerable people safe. So I would say that just navigating that insurance, you will learn very quickly that people can work at the same place but have very different insurance plans. So some people are covered under psychotherapy, which OCSWSSWs can fall under for certain insurance companies. Other insurance companies don't want you unless you're a psychologist practicing psychotherapy. So you're going to spend a lot of time on the phone advocating for yourself. And there's a lot of back end work, right? So I think those are the things that you have to keep in mind. And I wouldn't say it necessarily like hit me like a truck surprised me, but it did. My colleague came to me the other day and she's like, I didn't realize that there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes administration wise. And it is because you're running a business, right? So, and I'm really excited to talk about the business piece of it too, because that takes a lot of work, a lot of unpaid work when you're running your own business. So I'm very excited to talk about those pieces. But I'd say those are the two things that, take some getting used to.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up such a good point. We are going to delve into it a bit more too. But it is interesting that I think sometimes people just think, oh, well, this is just going to be like a quick, easy thing that I can do, as like a side hustle. And we were remarking before the panel as well that it doesn't matter if you have one client or like 100 clients. Like you have to have these practices in place. And your ethical responsibility to all of your clients is the same, no matter how many you have. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. Kate, I have a two-parter question for you. Okay. So through the lens of someone who regularly hears patient and caregiver voices, what do you think are the most important things to communicate to those who are in private practice or thinking about going into private practice? It's part one. And we know that you have an extensive background in strategy, leadership, and personal development. Do you have any additional insights about a registrant entering private practice from that perspective?
So there's so much in both those questions. There is. Okay. And you guys have also started covering a lot of this. So I'm going to take just one thing to add that isn't in my bio is my partner is also a therapist in private practice. So I have this perspective as well, a registered psychotherapist, not in this college. And so I get to see from this lens as well. And I'm also as a coach, I'm in a listserv of queer coaches and therapists in Toronto. And so I get to see a lot of what's going on? I need supervision today, or I need a consultation today stuff. So if I think about all those perspectives from a client lens in particular, and from a patient caregiver lens, I think I covered the most important piece around the trust piece and how do you convey that trust. And so there's some things that I think are similar to what you've talked about. Like a first piece of trust is, how much time are you going to give that person to decide if you're a fit or not? How do you set up a practice so that, do you have a 10-minute phone call with people before they come in for the first time, a 15-minute phone call? How do you figure out if they're the right fit? So there's things like that that are trust establishing practices that if you can figure those things out, and be prepared to sort of say, I don't think we're a fit. Here's a place, here's another referral. That kind of thing, that sort of handoff of, I'm not leaving you alone. These are even upfront pieces that I think are really important that people kind of hope for when they're thinking about, because there's so much anxiety when people are looking for therapists. I don't think we've covered that part. But when people get to the point of, I've never seen a therapist before, I feel like I want one, they often don't know how to go about finding one. They don't know how to choose. They don't know. So all of the things you can do to help a client know whether you're a right fit and how it's going to work, all of that stuff is number one. And then the piece that you're also alluding to around, how do you help them navigate the thicket of, does your insurance cover this? How does it do that? How do you navigate those pieces? And so it's a really weird blend of deep presence and switching gears really quickly into, okay, here's the administrative side of things, and here's how it works, and let me be really matter of fact and straightforward about it and not weird about it, right? Like, I'll even say, like, I've been a solo, like, I've had my own business since 1995. Like, I'm in various ways, mostly my consulting practice, but even then I get weird about charging people when it's a one-on-one. Like, even that's been my entire life. It's like, it's a weird thing. It's like, oh, you didn't pay, and so all that stuff, to make it as simple as possible, is a trust creation thing. So I think those are the most important things around the private practice piece. You've all really underlined the need for both community and supervision/consultation. When you make that visible, that's also really helpful to people. I think my understanding from clients is also that they want to trust your expertise, but also feel like a partner with you. And how do you establish that balance? And I think that's a really interesting, so you're not the deciding factor in everything, but they want to know you know what you're talking about, but they also want a lot of understanding of how to have autonomy and all of that. So those are things to bring forward, which relates to part 2 of the question in a way, which is I teach leadership to health professionals as part of the Faculty of Medicine at U of T in partnership with one of the hospitals. And I think my core question is usually with folks, they talk about what they want to do. Like, I want to be in private practice. I want to be a therapist. But my question is always, how do you want to be in that space? And what self do you want to bring to that space? And that's the other work. So all of the talk about your own personal work is really important from managing your triggers and all that stuff. But it's also, what are you trying to create? What is the impact you want to have with your clients? How do you want them to remember you? And so that's the work that, from a leadership and self perspective, I think is the ongoing, really important side of it. Because it's also in that zone that you start to figure out, actually, I do want to keep working with lots of like deep trauma that's caused by cultural stuff, or I really want to work with folks in this area. And these are the things I want to do to develop that practice. But knowing the impact, not just I want to be in private practice, but like, I want to be the kind of person people come to because they need this particular type of support, is the deep work, I think.
That's really great.
Mm-hmm.
And before moving on to the next question, I just saw everyone really resonating with what Kate was saying. So I just wanted to pause to see if anyone wanted to kind of follow up or comment on that.
I did briefly want to comment on the building trust piece. And something that I do in my initial intake is when I have a 15-minute phone call with a client, of course, sometimes it goes over 15 minutes, right? And we don't want to be, part of us, I want to say you want to have boundaries, right? But another part is if a client is telling you certain things and you're like, oh, okay, your 15 minutes is up. We want to be human first, right? But also establish boundaries to make sure that we are honoring our time. But in a first session, so in the consultation, I'll say to a client, no pressure to make a decision right now. Think about our conversation and you can email me if you decide to book. I'd love to have you.
9 times out of 10, I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, a client will book, right? The second piece is in my first session with a client, I will say 2 things. Firstly, I'll go over confidentiality, but I'll always say, I want you to know that you are protected by my college. If I ever do harm, obviously talk to me first, but you are protected by my registration. And I think that also puts, because there is a power hierarchy, there always is, right? Professional to client, but once you start, and I always say too, I'm very open to feedback. That is what makes our care and our trust. You can't expect someone to come into your room and trust you. These people have been wronged by a lot of people in their lives, and they don't owe us anything. They don't owe us to trust us. So how do you build that trust slowly with them? And how do you be human first? And obviously a professional, right? But I always say, feedback-informed therapy is really important. If you don't feel comfortable telling me face-to-face, email me, text me. And I have had clients who I've had a long-standing relationship with say, hey, didn't love that modality. Can we switch? Or reading your client's body language, right? If you're trying to do, something and they're like not having it, that's okay. But you really want to pay attention and put the ball in your client's court. You want to have a plan. You want to have structure, but they are their own best expert. They know themselves the best. We are not here to heal anyone. They have the capacity to heal. We want to create the container for them to do so. So that's kind of like what I do in my first sessions to really try to build that piece. And clients will ask me, when I got engaged, clients ask me, oh my gosh, you got engaged. We're taught to kind of shut that down. And I've shared, yes, I did. Thanks for noticing. And then we move along, right? They want a human. So it's really important is knowing where self-disclosure, where that line is, but also building a true relationship with them because you're human first.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other thoughts?
There's something, this is so good. I'm not going to read because it's excellent. Something you said, Kate, about partnership. And that's when I'm with clients on the phone. So I do a lot on the phone, the intake. I always let them, first I say, thank you for contacting me because I don't know what it took for you to do that. I have no, and I think doing the work for ourselves, I think a therapist should see a therapist. If you're in this work, you should have that experience to do that work yourself. And I've done that work as well. So I know what it's like, that fear for someone to reach out. So I always want them to, and they kind of like, oh, they don't know what to say. So affirming that courage is so powerful. And then I do, once I'm finished with the intake, I say, and I always say this is not a therapy session because I've had a session where it went into 30 minutes, an intake, I should say, and they just needed to pour out. And I've learned from that. I did some consultation, supervision. So really important to contain it to that 10 minutes. And at the end, I always say to the individual, we work as a team. So this is a partnership because we know the clinical dynamics, the hierarchy is there. We work as a team. So this is not me leading you. This is your space. You make that decision. I always end up saying, this isn't a sales pitch. You can decide if you will not hurt my feelings because I know what it's like to have to want to connect with another therapist, psychotherapist. So this is a huge decision. Take your time, email me back. So giving them that, empowering them to have that choice is so powerful. And most of the times they will connect, but I want them to have the time to process that. And they're like, okay, I'll get back to them. Like, remember, it's not a sales pitch. When we end the call, you're okay. You make that decision. You take your time. So it's so important. And this is about competency. How do we connect? Because people are hungering for genuine connection. And that connection, I truly believe, starts at the intake, whether that's in person or it's on the phone. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of my colleagues. It's great. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I guess similarly about the piece around, telling them to take their time. Like, to be honest, I quite directly encourage people to shop around and have multiple consultations because what we're talking about here, that initial sort of connection for a client to feel comfortable and safe, they have to have that, right? And so, having the experience of seeing what it's like to have those initial consultations with different therapists, it might give them, a better sense of who they'd like to move forward with. And also in that initial consultation, I say, this is an opportunity for you to share with me what brought you here, but also any questions that you might have for me. And often in those questions, it's not just, okay, what modalities do you use? What's your area of expertise? It's also this stuff must be hard. Why do you keep doing it?
Yes.
Or, why are you so interested in working with this population or working with this particular challenge? So it is an opportunity for you to, yes, maintain your professionalism, but also be authentic, like what you were saying, bringing that human component, right? So making sure that that's always present. I would just, add that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Great conversation that was generated there. So thank you all for participating. And my next question is actually for everyone. And so Kate, we're going to start with you this time, if that's okay. And we'll just move our way down the chairs. And I think some of this has been touched on, but just to maybe even further hone in on what practice or clinical competencies do you feel are necessary for a registrant to start private practice?
So many. I don't know how to, I might leave it at that, actually. I think you've all actually enacted so many of them. One of which is like at the core, the deep understanding of how does this client define their needs? How can I work with them to co-design how we are going to move toward them and help them decide when they're ready to move to the next step. Like, so whatever you want to name that, it's the part about the relational establishing of what's there. And in the context of that is reflexivity around noticing, oh, I am kind of triggered by that. I should be paying attention to that. And it can be so different. It's not like, oh, look, I've dealt with my trigger, because like one week it might be something really stupid, like scarcity. And you're like, oh, I want this client, even though they're not really a fit because I need money. Right? So there's that kind of reflexivity as well as what you're doing in working with the client. Like, whatever you call the clinical competency of creating the most client-centered possible space, I think, and having your own constant reflection and understanding of what's happening here, how am I contributing to it? Is this the best I can do? Is this am I getting trapped in a cycle? Like all of that sort of stuff. So it's that combination of client-centeredness and your own awareness of what's happening.
Sorry, I would say the biggest thing is self-regulation. What you're speaking about is noticing when I sit in front of this person, what is happening within my body and what could that mean, right? If someone comes in with a certain topic or you notice when that client leaves, there's something bubbling up inside of you. That's not on them. That's on you. What is it bringing up in you? And it's our responsibility to do the work to understand that and also have self-care practices. And I'm not talking bubble baths and all, which they could be, right? But I'm talking about true self-care. It means eating properly. I don't go into session if I skip breakfast and I'm full of caffeine because you can already see I'm a very energetic person, right? So you want to make sure that you're well nourished, you sleep well, you want to take care of yourself because again, you set that container for that client. So I have so many other things to say, but for time purposes, I'll say self-regulation and just working on self to be able to then give to other people. Being selfish in ways so you can be selfless to the people that you serve.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to try to think of what else I can share because it's just so great. This is what I had in mind as well. So one thing I'll add, and I'll put my professor hat on because it's graduates, it's frontline experience, having direct experience in the field. And for students, field placement is such a rich place in terms of a starting place. Right. So even if I know students may not get, like some of them they're coming to me saying, Miss, I really want to get into private practice. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. Because I see like it's so exciting, which it is. But what are we bringing to the experience with our clients? That starts with knowing myself. How am I when I'm interacting with clients? When I'm at my placement, learning case management, learning advocacy, right? Learning even intake assessments. Right? It doesn't have to jump into counseling skills, but in those rich active listening skills, that's being transferred to an intake assessment with our clients or with the individual we're working with. So placement is so fundamental to knowing myself. And that's where we bring in professional use of self. Yeah. So what are my values? What are my triggers? What's my personality that I bring into it? You can only really know yourself professionally when you're actually getting the experience in the field. Before then getting into private practice, because when you're working with diverse populations, you're working with diverse needs, complex needs. There's trauma, there's systemic issues, racism, poverty, disability. As a student, and I call my students future practitioners, but I want them to get into that mindset. This is a fantastic profession. How am I? Who am I? What am I bringing in? But that takes a lot of learning in terms of that. So to add to what my fellow panelists were saying, definitely that experience up front, line experience is that direct social work experience is so important, professionally and personally. Sorry, Christina, yes. Go ahead.
But I would imagine as well that, I mean, like your practicum, I mean, that's step one. But
Step one.
But when you graduate, that direct care is so essential.
That's right. So that's your foundation, and you're just springboarding from that, because I was in the field for 11 years before I got into private practice, which is something that just came to me, not me going to it. So even in that regard, then getting into the field, delving deeper into that. We talked about self-regulation. How do I regulate when a client is saying something that's creating a trigger in me? My emotional intelligence. Can I control my emotions? That's not up to the client. That's up to us. Field practice gives you that experience if you make the most out of it, and then you launch into your career, into other work before private practice. So you need that strong foundation before getting into private practice. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We said at the same time. Absolutely.
I think I would just kind of add to what's been shared already by bringing some of these things sort of to life with my own experience in practice, because I agree, of course, with everything that's been shared already. But, you know, what Natalie was saying about having that experience before you go into private practice, before you get into psychotherapy, I'll just use the example of working with veterans myself. So when I was completing my master's at the time, I was in a case management role doing direct practice with veterans, but it was case management. So it wasn't psychotherapy. There was a little bit of counseling involved. And it really gave me the opportunity to be like adjacent to the psychotherapy world and those who were providing those types of services to the clients, and, you know, working to coordinate their care, building that trust. And in that experience, I had the opportunity to really reflect myself on, like, okay, this work is difficult. It's heavy. Is this really, because I had already sort of mapped out that this is what I wanted to go, but I had to really make sure that I was ready, like from a personal perspective, right? Is this really the direction that I want to go in? Do I want to do this work in a more intimate way? And if so, what will that look like, right? So while in that case management role, I was able to like think about, okay, so what modalities are, you know, most evidence-based and effective in working with, you know, PTSD, depression, moral injury, those types of things, and begin my training before even stepping into my next role, which was psychotherapy, specializing in working with veterans and RCMP members, right? So it's like taking your time in working towards that thing that you may feel a really strong pull inside to do, but not just jumping the gun and saying, you know, I want to do this. I know I'll be good at it, therefore I'm going to do it. It's a process. It's a learning process in terms of education, training, but as everyone else has already shared, that self-awareness piece is a critical component of it. And so I really felt that in my journey, specifically in working with that population. I had to know, because it's such vulnerable work, I had to know before going into that specialization that this is for me. And I am positioned in a way where I can manage my own mental health and my own sort of self in navigating that work. So, you know, I think you're going to hear it over and over again. That self-awareness piece is so critical in this work.
Yeah. Right. Self-reflection and supervision. Hearing that very loud there.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
Clear, right?
Timing purposes, but I just want to say, I think with our field too, we have a lot of there's a lot of us who grew up as caregivers and we then make it our profession, right? And we can see a little bit of people pleasing, and just, I work with a couple of therapists that are my clients as well. And I just, like the nursing field, a lot of us like to be caretakers. We learned that we're worthy through caretaking. That is wonderful that is a part of us. But when we allow that to become our identity in the professional world, it can blur boundaries and lines. And that's how burnout hits. And that's how we also undercharge. We feel bad. And it actually causes a lot of messiness with boundaries with clients as well. So back to self-regulation, being aware of that. what is your why for going into this field? Is it because you feel valued and wanted when you're providing something to someone, which is a normal human piece, right? But is that your driver? Is that where you feel valued? And I think that's a big piece where I had to really look at myself, and it was really messy. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of unworkings that I have to do here to show up the way that I'd like to show up as a professional. So that's just the one piece I wanted to add.
Such a good point too, because I mean, and from our perspective at the college, that when those boundaries get blurred, that's when slippery slope stuff happens. Right?
100%.
And, you know, so we see that, and we know just from our complaints and discipline cases that being in private practice, this is one of the areas where, you know, boundary violations can occur because it's such a private place and it's such an intimate space. And so you're so right that being on top of your boundaries and being aware of that is crucial. And even to a point I thought was interesting earlier, Kate, when you talked about even the scarcity questions, right? About should I take this client on? And that can be something, and we respond to questions about that in the professional practice department, that people call us up and we have to have conversations about whether or not it's a conflict of interest to take a client on. That what are you being motivated here? Is this purely for financial gain that you're being motivated to take this person on? Or we also hear instances where like, well, I'm working with, you know, a brother and he wants me to work with his sister. And it's like, well, are you the best person to do that? Is there anybody else who can provide that service? You know, are you in a rural environment where you're the only person available? Or, you know, so there's a lot of these reflective questions that we propose to people as well when they call us. Or I'm leaving a practice and I'm starting my own. Can I take clients from there? Well, this is a big question, right? And you need to stop and think about this. Are you permitted to, you know, maybe get a legal consult? So those are a lot of the different questions that we end up getting at the professional practice department as well, where people are trying to work through these things. And you need to be aware of those boundaries, of those ethics, of whether or not scarcity is impacting your decision making. Yeah. Thank you all for that. Bianca, I'm going to start with you for this one because you've been really excited to talk about small businesses.
Yeah.
So my question is, many registrants, and I've got a big preamble for this one, so give me a second here. But many registrants don't realize that private practice is a small business. And perhaps I'm going to preface this question with some facts, that there are instrumental considerations that must be made when going in private practice. And this is just a sample of them. Will you practice virtually or in person? If in person, where will that space be? What are the safety considerations? If online, what video platform? What are the confidentiality considerations with that platform? What documentation system are you going to use? Is it going to be an online documentation system? Is it going to be paper-based? What are the confidentiality considerations with both? And what insurance do you have? That's already been mentioned. What will your advertising look like? A lot of ethical considerations there. Are you going to have a website? If so, will someone build it? How much will you charge? These are all so many things that people I don't always understand before they're going into private practice. And I know, Kate, you're going to have a good perspective on this too, because you've been a consultant at different organizations, but I did want to turn it to Bianca first.
Yeah, so you are running a business. You wear many hats as a private practitioner. You run the business. Do you want to hire a bookkeeper? Are you keeping track of your expenses monthly? The first thing that I will say is, in your area, look for your local entrepreneurship and small business centers. I think I shared with all of you that my first year of opening up my group practice, I received this $5,000 grant from my small business center in Windsor to help me build my physical location, and then a $2,500 grant to help me with marketing. That is incredible. And with that, I received a week-long intensive coaching, business coaching. And so I had to do a whole business plan, a SWOT analysis. I had to look at my competitors, their strengths, perhaps my weaknesses. And then I also had to look at, what is my collaboration going to look like with other businesses in my area? Other therapists I've gone out for coffee with, they have different specialties and we've really connected. So we have a referral network. On top of that too, connecting with psychiatrist offices, doctor's offices, right? The people in my building, I went around and introduced myself. Hey, we're neighbors now. This is the services we offer. You'll see me around, right? Like you are your brand. So everywhere that you go, you are representing your brand and what you do. You are a business. So these are the things that can be really, really exciting, but also be really challenging as well. And I'd say the first thing that you should do is you should take an Excel sheet and write down your expenses of what you need to make your mortgage, your rent, your living expenses. What does that need to look like for you to sustain yourself? Then you need to do on paper, put it on paper. How many clients do I have to see? What overhead costs do I have to account for? There's expenses with running a business, right? There's overhead, there's commercial leases, your EHR system, your Jane system, Zoom, whatever you're using, it's going to cost you, right? So I started my private practice while working at the school board part-time. I took my contract back and that helped me a little bit, but I think it's really important while making that transition is having a source of steady income so you're not in that scarcity mindset where then you're making decisions out of scarcity. You want to be comfortable, and slow, sustainable growth is what is going to contribute to your success. So there's so much more I could say on this, but I want to be mindful of my time. But yeah, like you are running a business, you are going to be a business owner. So, there's a lot of things that go into that.
That's great. Thank you.
I feel like you need a TikTok channel helping GPs.
I deleted TikTok. I'm so proud of myself. I did short form videos. I'm working on my attention span. I am TikTok free since the summer and I feel great. But I do love to talk about this stuff because it's so empowering. It's really exciting and it can be really, really fun when you collaborate and you get to do your marketing and you get to talk to people. But at the end of the day, it is your livelihood. So you have to make sure that you're, again, in a regulated state. So then you're not operating out of scarcity, making decisions out of scarcity or impulse.
And you've really demonstrated, too, that there's a lot to think about.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Not much to add. Like that was just very fulsome. And it was, I think for me, because I'm with a mental health clinic, I work remotely, being tech savvy, like those tech pieces are very, very important. So the platform we use Owl. I know there's Jane. I think just being able to have that mindset of being able, people can still connect. We can connect beyond being in the same space.
Yes.
Right? It's what we are bringing to that space with our client who we're working with. So I just think being comfortable and navigating those spaces. How do I ensure, like, if there is a suicidality happening, right? And I'm online, I'm not with that individual.
Yes.
That can be a bit challenging. So how do I ensure, like, risk management, duty to report, navigating those ethical pieces while doing this work virtually is so critically important. And having, again, we talk about this supervision, being able to consult with my supervisor. You mentioned you had someone in another country who, right, we have to be able to not just in isolation, but have that awareness and use wisdom. What is in the best interest of this client who is in a very, very vulnerable situation? And doing that responsibly and ethically within the virtual, because I'm virtual, so within that virtual space is so fundamental. So I just want to kind of add that too, because you added such a fulsome response. But yeah, that tech piece, the Wi-Fi, and just being comfortable with that. And switching to another platform. I'll say this to clients, it might be my Wi-Fi, might be yours. Phone is not my favorite, but do you want to meet on my phone? If not, we'll reschedule. But being able to pivot when you need to in those spaces. So yeah.
Thank you.
I think I would just add, in terms of like from the business side of things, it's important to remember as well that it's not just when you start your own clinic or you start your own group practice that you're a business owner. As an independent contractor, you are a business owner, right? So it's really important to remember that, because although you might be working at a clinic, you may have a supervisor and a manager. As an independent contractor, you are responsible for your business, for how you run your business, for your finances, and of course, for your ethics and your practice, right? So, as all of us know, the college's standards of practice, of course, there's expectations and requirements around advertising, fees, confidentiality. Those types of things can inform, your informed consent, how you advertise those areas. But, the college isn't going to prescribe for you how to structure your business, right? It's not going to tell you how to run the financial components of your business, what your fees are going to be. And also, if you're starting off as an independent contractor, knowing what type of fee you are comfortable with and what does the fee structure look like for the organization that you are contracted out by, and how to navigate those pieces. So, it's, if you start your own clinic, of course, you are certainly a business owner. If you have a group practice, then it gets even more complex. But understand, even as an independent contractor, you will want to have an accountant, right? You will want to potentially consider a business mentor, not just clinical supervision, right? Because there are two different ways that you're going to be navigating your career when you're in private practice. There is the business side, and then of course there's the clinical side, and those things interact as well. Right. But remember that, right? Because we get a lot of inquiries, of course, at the college from those working in private practice, because it is a very big sector right now. And it is a business. So there are certain things that is incumbent upon you as a provider to make sure that you're aware and knowledgeable of and educate yourself on the business side of things, specifically for health professionals, right? Because for health professionals, it can be different, even if you think about from the tax perspective and finances. It can be different for health practitioners than, somebody next door who has a beauty clinic, right? So just wanted to share those pieces about independent contracting.
And I'll just be really quick because you've all covered all of it so beautifully. The one thing I would add is you've talked about business mentors and business coaching. I would add to that some coaching around your relationship with money, because I know more than one person in private practice who has not paid their own taxes for at least 3 years, because this is the kind of hole you can get yourself into when you're forwarding your practice as a therapist, which is what it should be, but then the other side of it just kind of recedes to the back, right? And if you're not super organized around things like this, it's actually, I know a lot of people who've got weird stuff about money, and you kind of need to work that out, because you have to be really clear-eyed about it. And I say this as somebody who's been independent, having to remit taxes for 30 years now. And I have a lot of colleagues who run up against stuff because they're like, well, that's my one extra piece.
That's a really great piece.
Yeah.
I think it's an important thing to think about. And, another thing that twigged for me when everyone was talking to is, like, Natalie, you had mentioned that being online, that someone endorses suicidality.
Yeah.
And, like, we hear about this as well, that, well, what do I do? And so we've put it in the standards of practice, like in our confidentiality piece, that when you are working with people online, you've got to navigate these things out the gates,
Yes.
right? That this needs to be part of your confidentiality agreement that's happening. I need to have an emergency contact for you. Or, like, we're even having a difficult conversation and power goes out, and I need to be able to contact you. Or is there anybody else in the room with you? Is there a signal that we have to have that I know if you're alone or if you're safe? And we heard about this, over the pandemic, that there was big instances of intimate partner violence and partners listening in. We've even heard as well about parents, listening off. Exactly, right? So thinking about those confidentiality practices that you have to have explained at the outset of practice for people as well when you are practicing in a virtual, because it is different with virtual, because when you're in person you see what's happening.
Exactly.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for all of that. That was excellent conversation. Maybe our last question likely will be, and I really wanted to just ask as well, what you think are the biggest risks to the public for registrants entering private practice without the needed competencies. And Nikki, I'm going to start with you and bring it forward this way.
Sure. I think just to kind of cover up one piece, I would say that the boundaries piece, as it relates to psychotherapy, working in private practice, is so key on two different levels. So when I think about boundaries, I think about, of course, boundaries with clients, making sure that it's a professional relationship. You're not going down that slippery slope of a more personal sort of friendship-like relationship, or, certainly not getting into the romantic, sexual side of things. As we know, sexual misconduct, we all know, don't do it. But so having those boundary pieces with clients is really important in the service relationship. But I also think about the risks of not having boundaries around the scarcity that everybody's talking about, right? So if you don't understand what for you, because it's different for every provider, like what is the limits to how frequently you can service clients, how many sessions can you have per day, per week. Knowing that is so important, because you have to put the client's best interests at the forefront. And if you're overworking yourself, especially in this field, it's going to be not just a disservice to clients, but potentially you could cause harm, because the quality of the care that you provide may be compromised, right? If you don't understand, no, you know what, my cap is, 3 a day, or my cap is 4 a day, or maybe I work 4 days a week and I have one admin day because I know I need that buffer where I can take a step back from that heavy type work, right? So really knowing those boundaries to protect clients and also prevent burnout, right? Because if you're burnt out, you're also no good to clients. You're also putting clients at risk. So I just think as one of the biggest risks to clients, their safety and their care is knowing your personal boundaries, your professional boundaries, and your business boundaries, and keeping the client and the work that you do at the forefront. Self-care is part of the work. It's not an add-on. It's not an afterthought. It's part of the work.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm just like, so great. To add to that, working in isolation, I think that, I know we've talked about that, but to bring that back home, because competency, being effective, is knowing when to seek for that supervision and that peer consultation. Because when we're practicing in silo, we have no idea as to the harm, unintentional, that could be caused to our clients. And also, are we recognizing there's that inherent abuse of power? And so even in my classes, I've integrated my counseling skills course, I was telling Nikki earlier, for the college that you had the 2024 educational session, the slippery slope, I've integrated that now into all of my counseling skills classes. And students are like, wow, like, you see how that it just takes a few of these patterns of behavior, and then we see this client has been abused, right? And students are so surprised at that. So really realizing we have to work together. You need to be working inclusive with your supervisor, knowing that, am I misdiagnosing? If this is not my realm of or my scope of practice, I'm comfortable referring the client to someone who's able to meet that need. So there's so many various, like, I could go on about, I want to have my panelists be able to share, but that area as well, that isolation, limited consultation, and our blind spots, being mindful, counter transfers, like those come into play. So knowing yourself, professional use of self-awareness. I know it's been repeated, but it's probably worth repeating. Yeah. So just some of those pieces I want to add on to what Nikki shared.
I'm going to make super, super short, but if you go to buy a car and the salesperson has never been behind the wheel of a car before, are you going to trust that person to sell you a vehicle? The full safety features, how it runs, right? They've never been behind the car before. They don't have their license. I think that's what speaks to, if I could just wrap up everything in a tight little bow, about doing our own work. And I'm not saying that therapy is the be all end all. There's a lot of personal work that can go into that. Therapy is a component of that. But you want to sit across from someone and feel confident that I've done the work myself, I've walked the journey myself, and now we're going to walk the journey together, right? So we want to lead by example. So, and that's, you can't, that's kind of, I guess, runs into not doing harm. You want to know what it feels like to be on the other side of that chair. You want to know what it feels like to be on the other side of that power imbalance, because as much as we try to keep it equal, unfortunately, with our profession, there's always going to be that. It's unsaid in the room, right? So I'm going to pass it off to you, but that's my little analogy for the day.
It's a good analogy. Those are great. Those are all great pieces. So I'm just going to answer the question kind of as asked, which is, what are the risks to the public? Yeah. And it's actually, you've all pointed to the risks, which is bad therapy, right? And what happens in the form of bad therapy is there's individual terrible experiences and people are not helped. But then you have a population health situation where you have a lot more people in the province who think they've tried to get therapy and now they're not getting served. And therefore there's risks to the reputation of the profession. There's risks to, but I think the thing is, it's that notion that you want everybody who says, I'm actually going to take this risk to put myself into a vulnerable place and look for some therapy. You want all of those people to get the kind of care that creates a narrative in the system that that's a good thing to do. So I think I'll just leave it at that, because it's...
Yeah. That's profound. And it is one of the things that we talk about, that when clients don't receive good care or when clients are harmed, that it does have an impact. It's got such ripple effects. And it's not only that client who's harmed, it's their family, it's their community, it's health professions, because a bad name has been put out there about receiving help. Such a great point, and a beautiful point where we're going to have to stop the panel right now. We're going to look to a question period very shortly. It's really clear that we could have gone on about this for a lot longer. It's a really passionate topic, great panelists to share in this conversation. So I want to thank you for that. Really important. But I think we're going to turn it over now to Haley, who is going to be asked for a question period.
And just remind people as well that you can submit your questions through the chat feature on the right-hand side of the session page in the virtual portal. We're going to do our best to answer all of the questions as time permits, but we really do thank you for your understanding if we're not able to get to all of them, because I'm sure, Haley's already given me that we are not getting to all of them because there's been a lot. So thank you to everybody for your patience and understanding.
Thank you. Yes. I've never seen so many questions coming in about a session. So clearly this is really, really resonated with registrants.
Excellent.
Lots of amazing comments thanking you for your expertise and for sharing and thank you for being here. There are a lot of questions that are specific to professional practice at the college in terms of definitions and in terms of asking questions about what types of experience you need to get into private practice. So I'm going to leave those questions out, and I would encourage all of the individuals who've put those types of questions in to please contact the professional practice department. You can send them an email at practice@OCSWSSW.org. And perhaps my colleague Sarah can put that in the chat so everyone can see it.
Just quickly as well, Haley, too, that on our website, we do have a web page on private practice and a web page on psychotherapy.
Yes.
And also the practice guidelines for performing the controlled active psychotherapy.
Yes. So we do have some great resources. I'm just going to ask one really quick question of Bianca before we get started. Do you have any podcasts? Somebody wanted to know.
I've been featured in a couple podcasts. So I've been featured in a couple podcasts. That's really, really sweet. Maybe another venture. But can I share my social media? So I have a professional social media. It's called Mindfully Me. I'm not very good at posting on it, but if you click the link, oh my God, this sounds awful. If you click the link in my bio, there is some links of where I've been featured on a couple podcasts talking a little bit about my approach to care and a little bit about my personal story. So that is very, very sweet. I'm a little bit flushed, but thank you for asking. So you can check it out there.
Great. Thank you. And so we had a question. You talked a little bit about imposter syndrome. Wondering if you can sort of expand on that a little bit. Can you share with those of us who are competent and have the experience and are ready to start our own private practice, how you dealt with your imposter syndrome?
Sister? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. I think, it's likely something that comes up for a lot of people in private practice, but also probably just in the professions themselves, in social work and social service work, because the fields are so broad and we're working with human beings that are incredibly diverse and complex. So I cannot think of a period in my career where I didn't come across something new that I wasn't certain exactly how to navigate. And so for me, in terms of dealing with, the imposter syndrome or some of those challenges that you may come across in your career around not feeling quite confident on where to go next, we've talked about it over and over, right? That supervision and consultation is really key to ensure that you're connecting with those around you who are experienced that can offer you some guidance on how to move forward. And moving forward might be continuing to service that client with extra support, or it may be, okay, no, you know what? This is not an area of expertise. I don't have the competence to work with this specific thing that has come up. And so I'm going to collaborate with the client to refer them out to services that they may benefit more from than what I can offer them, right? So I think humility is really important in these professions. Like I said, not specific to psychotherapy, quite frankly, just the professions themselves, because we are always learning. We will never know it all in this work.
I think just to add, being okay that you're unsure of yourself. I think that's okay. This person wants to launch into it. It's not like it's going to be perfect. It won't be.
Yeah.
Doing it and connecting when you know what you're able to bring to that space, right? Yeah. what you're able to bring, and growing in that, developing in that. Even though we've all been working for many years, like I think we never stop evolving as professionals. That professional use of self is so important. So that confidence grew for me as I got deeper into doing psychotherapy, and also listening to your clients in terms of my training has been informed by my clients, not the other way around. So I've leaned into a lot of trauma training, because that has been the heart of what a lot of the clients I'm working with are experiencing. Listening to my clients and being informed by their experiences to then shape my training and my learning. We should always be hungry to learn and build our confidence and to practice that.
Yes. I will start off with maybe saying, what does it mean to be seen? If you're struggling with imposter syndrome, what is that like for you to be seen? And I guess that goes into your own personal reflection, right? To be put out there to market, what is that pulling up in you? Secondly, I will say find a mentor or somebody you look up to that believes in you. That has been instrumental in my journey. These people who I look up to, they're leaders in trauma-informed care. When they believed in me, when I didn't believe in myself, of course, we have to have some self-belief, but that propelled me forward and it helped the imposter syndrome settle a little bit. And imposter syndrome isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's that little voice that says we could always be doing more, right? In a balanced way, we could always be doing more. We could always learn more. So lean into it. I always say my imposter syndrome just wants to make sure I'm doing no harm. And I kind of lean into it and say, what does it need from me? And really work on what is it like to be seen by our colleagues, by the public? What does that bring up in you? And those are my 3 pieces, I think, for battling imposter syndrome.
That's great. Thank you. And I'll just add really quickly to summarize, I kind of think what all of you pointed to is with a lot of my clients, I remind them that the learning model, that you're always following a cycle of first you're unconsciously incompetent, and then you become consciously incompetent. And that's when you're learning something new. And that's when imposter syndrome kicks in. You're like, I thought I knew what I was doing. Maybe I don't. Maybe I shouldn't be here. But then you become consciously competent. And then you, over time, become unconsciously competent at the thing. And then it repeats as you learn new things. But if you remember that conscious incompetence stage is a requisite stage to learn something new, you can let go a little. It's like it's developmental. It has to be there.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's really brilliant.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to combine a couple of questions because they're sort of along the same lines. So they're about supervision. And so a couple people are wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how you navigated the supervision process when you first started out. How often did you meet with your supervisor? Things such as that nature. And then for the second part, people who are a little bit more experienced and looking to get into supervision, do you have any advice for them?
I'll start off with what I started with supervision. So I created a log on my laptop and I basically met with my supervisor weekly when I first started. And of course, there's an expense component to that, but that's what I felt I needed to feel very competent. That was with my official supervisor. Then I did consultations weekly with the Arizona Trauma Institute, not about client cases, but more developing clinical skills. And then as a group practice owner right now, I meet with we do peer supervision monthly, but then I seek individual supervision bi-weekly right now, just because I work with complex trauma. So they are pretty heavy cases. And then I've also consulted with a couple other people that are in the States where I've paid and I've done little didactic groups to hone in on my skills. I know that these things cost money, but it's really priceless to show up feeling confident, right? I've always said, like, oh my goodness, this is costing me. But at the end of the day, if I can show up regulated and feel very confident in my skills, my clients are coming back because we're seeing progress and I'm doing my job properly. That investment is really, it's priceless, right? So that's kind of how it went for me. But that started with weekly for the first, I'd say 6 to 8 months, then went to bi-weekly. And then it's kind of like, I at least seek 3 consultations or supervisions, at least 3 monthly, even though I've been in the field now for 5 years. It just makes me feel very confident and grounded.
Okay. Similar to Bianca as well, just that concept, especially when I was first new, that first year it's mandated. When you were a new psychotherapist at the mental health clinic, you're meeting regularly with the supervisor. She's fantastic, open door policy. And this was always just virtual. So important. And then as I developed more into the practice, so a year into it, it's not as frequent, wasn't as once a week. It became a little bit less frequent, but still consistent. Yes. And then especially with those crises cases that were coming up, always open door, very hands-on, and then also looking at the peer consultation group that I started for myself as well. Always needing to have, like you have those two components to keep you accountable.
Yes.
And those self-reflective moments are so, so important to know I am doing this right and I'm not causing harm and I'm working in the best interest of my clients. So supervision is solid and continuous for me, even after almost 5 years. Absolutely.
I guess I can say for me, for supervision, I was fortunate enough early in my psychotherapy practice that I was doing a little bit in private practice, and then my full-time role was also psychotherapy. So I was actually having like weekly supervision in one setting, and then in the other setting, it was at minimal monthly, but then I could seek further supervision on specific cases should I need it. So I would say in the first like 1.5 to 2 years of my psychotherapy practice, I had pretty intense supervision with access to peer consultation as well. And then from there, I think similar to what some others said, I started actually like seeking out my own supervision outside of those clinics because I was recognizing there were certain areas, for example, working with clients who suffer from dissociation. So there wasn't really people within the clinic who had expertise in that area. So I had to do the research and put myself out there to explore opportunities for supervision and consultation to help me build my expertise in that area so that I could adequately address some of the issues that were coming up with my clients. So, and I'm saying that, 6 years into doing psychotherapy. So it very much is an ongoing throughout your career, like what was shared earlier for, to support you in having your confidence in doing the work, but also to making sure you're doing so competently, you're not bringing harm to clients. And it's also to have, just like clients need an objective person to provide them with services for that support, we also need someone objective to help us ensure that we're practicing, ethically in the best interest of the client, but also that the version of us that is showing up in the work is, there's appropriate boundaries and things like that. So it's really layered, and that is why, of course, it's something that you should have throughout your career, and that learning and education is also required on the college's end in terms of that professional development piece.
So I'm not a person who gets supervision in that context because I'm not a clinician, but I will just add to what you just said. A thing that's been bubbling for me as we've been talking is that I work in a lot of spaces where there's, particularly with youth, where the practices, like a lot of my clients have this work, where the practices are not like super evidence informed. And like there's a lot going on where if you don't have supervision and you don't have ongoing learning, you're not actually understanding what's needed in the community. So there's the formal piece, but there's also just the like group supervision that can bring you something new because you're hearing people's different perspectives and stuff. So I just want to kind of have that perspective out there that like, there's emergent practice as much as there is like evidence-based practice. And how are you staying tuned to that? I think that's a thing I'd like to like sort of elevate. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Just to build on Nikki's point about continuous learning and our CCP program that registrants are required to engage in yearly. We did have a couple questions about that. If you do have any questions about your CCP specifically, you can contact our wonderful professional practice team at CCP at OSC. Yes.
The college.
At the college, OCSWSSW.org. My apologies. And I think we have time for one more question. And again, I think this is probably going to be a personal choice, but got some questions about private practice versus opening up a group practice. Group practice, would you have more support for admin and that kind of thing? Just your thoughts on that.
I guess, are they asking for them to open up their own group practice, joining a group practice or joining an independent practice? Do you know?
I think the question was specifically about starting, like which would you start?
Oh,
but I think you could speak to joining a group practices as well. I'm sure that would be very relevant.
So I did start my journey in a group practice where I built a lot of my skills and I built my client base up. I was an independent contractor, so all the advertising, all of that was on me. Then essentially when I reached a waitlist capacity, I was referring out to the community quite often. I realized that I wanted to have referrals in-house so we could work as a team in a very collaborative approach, knowing that they really believe in the same non-pathologizing way that I believe in mental health, and making sure that they had the proper training that I really believed in. And maybe it's a little bit of control pieces, but a lot of the people who came to me, and my group practice evolved really organically. I kind of started getting affiliated with some clinicians in the community, and they all worked full time, and they started asking me questions about private practice. And then I had the thought one day, I thought, what if I opened up a private practice? And again, I went into my values. What do I value? And my values are people over profit. I would rather pay my clinicians a livable wage and be above the average than have a high turnover rate, because there is a lot of exploitation in the group practice industry. I've joined a lot of Facebook groups, and it's quite sickening to see the way that it is a business at the end of the day, but if you operate just on business principles, it can be predatory, and we're not in the right field to operate like that. So I'm I guess, the question was like how to make that decision. I guess there's a lot of responsibility with group practice, a lot of responsibility. And I would say start with an independent practice first, build up your caseload, see if you like the responsibility of being a business owner, and then see if you have the skills, if you enjoy leadership, if you enjoy having hard conversations. If you struggle with people pleasing, being a leader is going to be very hard. I speak from my own personal experience. It's going to cause a lot of resentment and inner turmoil that's going to bleed out in the most important people around you, like your family and friends. So you really don't want your business to run you. You want to be able to run your business confidently. So I guess the question was, I guess, like which way to go. It's really what you think is best for you. Do you enjoy being in a leadership role? Do you have management experience? Do you enjoy being the person that people come to when things go wrong? Can you handle that? Or would you like to just worry about yourself and worry about your clients? There are two different avenues that you can take. Both have their pros and cons, and they're both a beautiful experience. You just have to be ready. And again, mentorship is a really, really big component of it. There's been times where I called my business coach, like sobbing, like, please, like, can we talk? And that was really helpful for me. It's always going to somebody that knows their stuff and helps you stay grounded and says, Bianca, I've been there before. This is what I've done. What do you need? So there's, definitely pros and cons to both, I would say. But if you're starting as an independent contractor, starting at a group practice that pays you ethically isn't a terrible idea, because you're in collaboration, sometimes supervision's included, and you're with people. You're not in isolation. So it's a really wonderful experience. And a lot of group practice owners, myself, I allow my clinicians to have their independent practice on the side. They do what they want. And there was a question too of like, can I take my clients with me? Absolutely. Obviously, I would love for them to stay, like my independent contractor to stay with me. But at the end of the day, everyone deserves to have their own journey. And I would never, those aren't my clients. Mm-hmm. They're the therapist clients. And I'm not a stickler for that. I don't believe in like non-clause. There's a lot of stuff. Clause. Yeah, non-compete clause. Because of course, I would never want someone to come to me and just gain all these clients and leave. You would hope that their character that's not their intention. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to say you can't have your clients that you've built a rapport with, because now I'm doing harm to those clients. And that's not that just doesn't benefit anybody.
But not all group practices behave that way.
Oh, no. Yeah. I know when you have business people though running group practices, they don't see the humanity in it. And I think that's why you have to have a balance of both to really be ethical, sustainable, and really enjoy doing the work that you do. So I hope that answered the question. I feel like I went like this, but I'm hoping that was kind of answered the question.
I think that's great. Like I said, it'll definitely be personal, and I think they're just looking for some firsthand experience. We're pretty much out of time. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to quickly chime in on that question, or if I should turn it back over to Christina. But if you have a quick thought, please feel free.
No, I think Bianca covered it very well. I think ultimately it is a personal decision. And I think I would tie it back to that piece that I spoke of earlier in terms of like knowing your own boundaries on a professional and personal level. Like, what is your capacity? And so do you have capacity for just, like you said, the one-on-one, just being responsible for your clients? Or do you have like mental, emotional, and actual time capacity to have your own practice and then build out into a group practice, right? I think having experience with that and being really attuned to yourself to know what you can offer and doing so ethically and competently is the most important part in making that decision.
Anything to add?
I just think that's your next podcast.
So listen, if you guys will record with me, I'll do it. Yes. I thought so. I thought this was a good conversation, some good conversation. Wow, I'm flattered, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, as you can see, we've had a great conversation today. And unfortunately, this does bring us to the end of our 2025 Educational Forum. It has been a really rich conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us. On behalf of the college, I want to thank Kate, Bianca, Natalie, and Nikki for being here with us today. It's like I said, it's been a rich conversation, really clear that, things you need to concern yourself with are building community, ensuring you've got that supervision, making sure you've got that years of direct practice behind you before going into practice, making sure that you've got that support system around you of supervision, consultation, mentorship. So really great pieces that we touched on today, and just want to thank you all very much for your time and your participation. It was a really lovely conversation to be part of. So thank you. And also thank you to everyone who watched today. I hope that you were able to make the most of this virtual event. And we also want to remind attendees that you're going to receive an email later today asking you to complete a post-event feedback form to share your experience of the event. And once you complete the feedback form, you'll have access to a link in the certificate of participation for your records. And wanted to remind you as well that watching an educational forum can be an activity that you use for your CCP. So always be thinking about that this time of year as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for your participation today, and we'll speak to you next time.